Hey friends, welcome back. Gabriel Kevin here. How are you today? Hope you're having a great day. And here we have another installment in my tutorial suite of music tutorials covering from mixing, recording, mastering, producing, and all that great stuff. So today we're just going to do some basic stuff out of Studio One, which is the DAW, D-A-W, digital audio workstation that I use. And you can use any DAW. It's your preference, whether it's Pro Tools or Ableton or Studio One. I prefer Studio One because I find it more intuitive and drag and drop. I started with Pro Tools, nothing wrong with it. It's just your own personal preference. So in most of my tutorials, I do cover the concept of things which transcend the DAWs and can be applied to any DAW. And then the application of those concepts, I use Studio One, which is what you're seeing in front of you. So there's two kinds of sessions in Studio One. There is the song session, which you're seeing, where you have all your tracks. And then there is the mastering session, which is called a project. And look at my mastering tutorial for those concepts, etc., etc. So today we're just going to do some basic stuff about tracks. Okay, so let's get started. So tracks are where you will record a specific performance. So you could have a vocal track, you could have a guitar track, you could have a drum track, you could have a MIDI track where you're using, say, a MIDI controller and a MIDI plugin of instruments, and you can add that. So the tracks are basically, and you probably already know this, so I'm going to kind of go through this, at a fairly good speed, so we don't belay the point all over the place. Okay, so tracks are the performances. So here we have in Studio One, I have a lead vocal main track, a double, and then I have guitar stuff, which I put in that color, and like guitar solo stuff in that color, etc. And you have all these tracks that make up your song, and each one of these is a recording. So that's pretty straightforward. So let's look at in Studio One how you manage these. So there's multiple kinds of tracks that you can create based on what you want to do. So if you come up here to the top and you hit track, it'll say add track, which will bring up a dialog box that will show. You can add in that, or you can do it directly here. Add audio track mono, audio track stereo, instrument track. Now in Studio One, an instrument track is a MIDI track, and then an automation track. And you can add folders and other stuff, but I'm just going to stick with the basics here. So, okay, so if we want to add a track, and say we want the dialog box, I click on that, and a dialog box will come up. Now, you can put your name here. You can say whether it's audio or those types of tracks. You can say, the color of it. You can say whether it's a stereo, and etc. What input is coming in, what the output is, and you can look at this, and that's how you can do it. Now, I generally don't use that. I would generally go up here because I know what I want to do, and I'll just add, say, a mono track. Now, before we do that, where is it going to add it? So if I don't have anything, it's going to add it as the first one. But if I have all this stuff here and I want to add, say, a harmony vocal. So I want the harmony vocal to be between this double vocal and this track 57, which I didn't put a name on. Okay, so here I'll highlight the lead vocal double. So whatever track is highlighted, that's where the new track will fall underneath. So let's do it. Track, add audio mono, and it's going to add it. Now it's going to default to a color, and you can change that color. So now I added a track. Now if I added a stereo track, it would add a stereo track, which would have a left or right in it, or a mono track, and we'll get into the various tracks in a minute, but that's how you add a track. So let's do some real other basics. So now I don't like this color, so I'm going to go over here to the left. I'm going to click on that, and there's all the different colors that Studio One gives you. So I'm going to make it, let's see, I'll make it blue. Okay, so now, actually it's the same color as this, green. Looked blue to me. So now I change the color because I want all my vocal tracks to be one color. I want my guitar tracks to be another color. And the reason for that is as you scroll down, I'm using my mouse to scroll down. You can say, oh, I know that's a vocal one. Oh, I know that's whatever schema you want to use. To change the name, if you didn't use the dialog, you can come right here and double click on the name and you can change it there. So I'll say this is a new track. Done. Easy. Okay. This little icon here tells you the type of track, so it's very quick to know. So if it looks like a waveform, that would be an audio track. An audio track would be you recorded a live guitar in, or you recorded a vocal in, and that's pretty standard stuff. But if you didn't know, that's an audio track. And that's why everything looks like a WAV file in audio tracks. So if I scroll down, and usually this is at the bottom, is where my instrument track. Yeah, wow, a lot of tracks in here. And the instrument track will look like this piano. I believe that looks like a piano, like a controller. And then the last one would be the automation track, which has no icon, but you know it's an automation track because it has this little thing here that says auto off, and you click on that, it says read, touch, last, write, and that's your indication that is an automation track, which we'll get into, and it also doesn't have an icon. And just as a note, the audio track, whether it's a stereo or a mono, will both have this waveform here. So that is how you add a track. That is how you change the color of a track. That is how you also rename a track. Okay, so let's talk about the console. Now, I do have a tutorial about navigation in Studio One, which goes into a whole console thing, and how you can resize things. This is basically going to talk about tracks. So I can manage the tracks here in the track list to the left. I can manage the tracks here in the console view. How do I get to the console view? Because I think when you first create a new song, you're not going to see the console view. Me, personally, professionally, I love seeing the console view because I come from the old days. And the old days is when none of this stuff, none of these DAWs existed, and you actually had outbound equipment with faders and stuff like that, and everything was recorded into those machines directly. You didn't use a computer. And so I'm kind of like, I like faders and I like that kind of stuff. So I like the console view. Plus, I think it gives a lot of good options for you. So how do you do that? You come up here to View, and you can hit Console. And if I turn that off, it'll go away. And then you have a lot more real estate here for all your tracks. Okay, so I do like having it on. So I'm going to put it back on, and we're going to go over a couple things. Okay, so now in these tracks, I can raise the volume here with this little bar. And I do have a tutorial on volume management, which goes a lot more detail, but I just want to point out I can raise it here. And I can also raise it down here with the fader. And here's a fader here. Now, the one that's highlighted is this one I called New Track. So I can pull that. If you look down below, you see the fader moving. If I pull the fader, you'll see that that moves. Okay, so you can manage volume here. In the track, you can also manage your input. So if you look at my recording tutorial, that'll show a lot more detail about the I/O inputs. But here is when you drop this down, these are the names that you gave to each one of your inputs in your audio interface. And again, a lot more detail in that tutorial. I try to keep my tutorials as short as possible, but they go on because there's a lot of information to cover. But anyway, so this drop down will say, hey, I just created this new track. It's an audio mono track, and I want to bring in, let's say, my Neumann mic, which is mic 4, because I'm going to do a vocal. And now that'll take the input and the input level that you have in your audio interface, and that will be used for the record. Okay, how do I record on a track? You hit the record button like that. Now that record button's on, and there's a little monitor here. If you want the sound that's being recorded to monitor back through your audio interface to your headphones or to the vocalist headphones, you have that on. Or if you want to actually use your audio interface mixer, which again, look at recording, you can do that. But that's what this button does. This button here will solo that track. So if you just want to hear that track, or if you want to hear multiple tracks solo, so I want to hear this vocal track and this vocal track and this vocal track all soloed, you click that and you'll hear all of them. Now, if you want to unsolo them, then you can just click them all off, or this one global little thing here will take them all off. Okay, same with mute. I want to mute this one and this one. I want to hear them in the mix, and I can turn them off by using this mute button here or individually. So that takes care of that. Now, you can also group things. And how would you group things? So if you can group them, but what I usually do is I'll just highlight them. So if I want to take these 3 vocal tracks, I'll click on the first one. I'll use my shift button. I'll click on the last one I want to highlight, and now they're all highlighted, and they also get highlighted in the console. Now, if I want to change all the volumes proportionally, I can just grab any one of them, and I'll pull it, and you'll notice they're all moving at the same time. So you can easily group this stuff together and do that same thing. And if they're grouped, the solo will also group, the mute will also group. Okay, and I believe the record will also group. So you can actually record multiple things at once. And you say, hey, Gabriel, why would I want to do that? Well, the reason why you might want to do that is because, say, you're recording live drums and you have 12 things coming in. All 12 of them will have that record button on. Cool. Okay, so let's look at a couple more things that are important in the song with tracks. So you have all your tracks here. Now your song is going to go across this timeline, and this is going to be true in almost every DAW. It's going to go across the timeline from the beginning of the song to, and I'm pulling this thing across, to the end of the song. And I'm going to kind of zoom out of the horizontal view so it's easier to see. So in Studio One, how do you know what the beginning of the song is and the end of the song? Well, it's not necessarily over here at the very beginning. It's wherever, I'm going to move this guy out of the way. It's wherever this start marker is. So your song, when you mix down these tracks, it will start at that start marker. And I can move it. So I can, let me get rid of this one thing here and get him out of the way. And this is my song Wonderland tutorial version, so I'm not ruining my song as I show you guys this stuff. So I can move the start thing here, and the actual mix down will start here. Now, if there's nothing here, it's going to be blank volume, no volume until it hits the intro, wherever. So you put the start thing where you want to start it, and that is where the mix down will happen. And then you go all the way to the right. And there's your end marker, and you can move that one out if you want more room at the end because you have some long fade or whatever, and those two determine where your mix down will happen. Now, when you mix down, you can say, I want to mix down, and we'll look at that. I want to mix down from the start marker to the end marker, which means you're mixing the whole song down to either an MP3 file or a WAV file, so you can go listen to it, you know, in your car or whatever as you're doing your mix. And I do have a mixing tutorial, so, and that shows concepts and Studio One. You can look at that. Or you can mix down between any one of these other markers. So I have a number 2, number 3, number 4, and you can change the name of these to make more sense. So if I want to, I can go up here to Song, and you go to Export Mix Down to mix down all your tracks. And here you can say, hey, I want to mix down to this file name, to this kind of format MP3, and I want to go from start to end marker. And that's what it will mix down. Or if you only want to do a certain section like a chorus or something, because you know everything else is fine, but I only made a change to the chorus, and I don't want to waste my time mixing down the whole song every time I make a change to that chorus, you can then set your markers between that chorus or whatever, and then say, hey, export range between selected markers. Okay, and then you have a drop down of all the markers you have out there, and I just have all these out here for just to show you guys stuff. And so I want to mix down between the start marker and number 2, and it knows what markers you have, which would be very short right here. So, okay, so that's how you mix down, and look at the mixing tutorial too for more information on that. But that's what your markers do, and that's the beginning of your song and the end of the song. Okay, now we already went through everything as far as groups and console and sizing. Oh, no, we did not do sizing. Let's do sizing. Okay, so sizing. So I can take this track and, well, okay, I can see it, but I need to get deeper into it visually. Maybe because I want to do some vocal alignment or whatever. So you can actually size that. So I can take it and I highlight the track, and right at the bottom of the track, you see the cursor changes to an up and down marker, and I can just pull this and I can size this bigger. Now I can see this a lot better. Now, if I want to expand horizontally, there's a button over here that can do that, which is a zoom button. And now I can get, wow, now I can really see what's going on here. Okay, so let's put this back. And again, if you group stuff together, so I take this one and the third one, and I group them together, and I size, they all will size proportionately. And the rest of the stuff below will stay the way it is. So say I did that, and then I took this guy and I made him smaller, and I did all kinds of stuff, and I'm off through all these tracks, and I've done my stuff, and everything's out of whack in terms of sizing. You don't have to go back to each one of them, try to make them all even again. A nice little feature and tip here is that right here, right down here where I'm circling, there is, looks like a hamburger kind of thing, like 3 lines together. If you hold that down, it creates a little fader thing, and I'm still holding down the left mouse button, and if I pull that, first thing it does is it makes them all the same. So now I've solved that problem. They're all back to the same. And now I can pull it and make them all small or make them all big, real big. And basically what I'll do is I'll just use this. It resizes everything to be the same, and I'll put it back to about where I like it, which is about right there. Okay, so that's a little trick right there, which is pretty cool. Okay, so what about if you want to move a track? So I want to take this track here, and I want to move it below this track here. Why? Well, because, it makes more sense. So say I did, it would make more sense to you is what I'm trying to say. So say I did this first vocal, I did another vocal, and then I added some guitars and stuff like that, and then, because you're adding tracks after track after track, and then I add another vocal track. Okay. And say I just put it down here for some reason. See, it's here. This vocal track's here. Okay, but I didn't think. I want to put that vocal track and move it up with these other vocal tracks. So what you can do is re-sing the whole thing. No, I'm just kidding. Just take the track, highlight it, hold it down, and move it. Drag and drop. So I'm going to take it, and in the little dialog box says move track. I'm going to push it up. Let's see, push it up. There. If you put it right there, it'll start moving it. And then there's a little blue line when you go in between the tracks, and wherever you stop, where that blue line is where it's going to move the track to. And there it did. It moved the track. No editing or anything happened when I did that. It just moved the track. So that's just, the organization of your tracks. So if you have like only 3 tracks, it's not going to really matter that much. If you have like 100 tracks, it will matter. So, if you're constantly recording and you're not caring right now where the tracks are, then you're going back to mixing and you want all your vocals together because you're applying the same plug-in to them, et cetera, et cetera. That would be the way you would move them. And so another good thing is like down here where I have the plugins, and it says Nectar, and I use Nectar from Isotope to do my vocal effects and stuff like that. If the tracks are together, the benefit of that is, let's assume that these 2 tracks here do not have a plugin on them. So I'll highlight both of them. I'm going to right click, I'm going to say remove. Again, I'm not hurting my song. I'll make sure it is the tutorial version. So now it's removing those 2 Nectar plugins, so they have no plugin at all. And I already worked this plugin, so I want to move this plugin and copy it to these 2 tracks. Well, if they're right next to each other, and this is organization of your tracks, if it's right next to each other, it makes it simple. So what I do is, I have this Nectar here, I highlight this track, I highlight this track, and I could even highlight this track, excuse me, and then I take this and I click on it, and I drag it over anywhere. So I drag it over to one of these, and it'll add it to all 3. It's going to take a second because it's a pretty comprehensive plugin, but it will start adding it to all 3. And that's a really good reason why you might want to have your vocal tracks together and you want to have your guitar tracks together, because if you create one plugin and you do all the work on that plugin and you want to copy it over, that's the quick way of doing it. Now, while it's copying, what it's doing is showing you the ones that it's copied. So it's copied the first one, it's copied the second one. And again, this is taking time because of this plugin, and you look at my plugin tutorial and my use of Nectar and stuff like that, this is a pretty comprehensive plugin. It has a lot of stuff in it, so it took a little time for that. Excuse me. Okay, cool. So there's good reasons to organize your tracks. Let's get deeper into the tracks. Just want to close this box here. There. Okay, so within a track, remember, a track is a performance of an instrument. Now, I personally don't think I would ever record a vocal on a track and on the same track record an instrument. I don't know why you would ever do that. Now, back in the day when you only had like machines that were only 16 tracks and you didn't have the capability of as many tracks as you want with a computer and a DAW, you were kind of limited. So sometimes you would have to do that and then bounce it to another track, and it would be very tedious. And so let's all be happy about the fact that we don't have to do that anymore. So since you can add as many tracks as you want, generally speaking, with even if you only have moderate disk space, you still can. You should be able to. you would never do that. You would have best practice. You would have the vocals on one track, instruments on another track, etc., etc. So getting to that within a track performance of a vocal, say, I could do different takes. So I can do, the intro vocal. I can do a chorus vocal. No, I'll put the verse vocals on another set of tracks, which I would recommend because then you can do something different with that. And then I would do the chorus singing here, and I would, et cetera, et cetera. So within this first track, let's say, these little boxes are called events. Now, if I sang in this chorus here, which I did, I sang the chorus from the beginning of this chorus marker all the way through the chorus for this first performance. I'm going to highlight it just so we can make sure we're talking the same thing. That was one performance. So that would have been one event, barring the fact that I didn't do any punching in or punching out. Okay, so look at my recording tutorial for punch in and punch out if you're not sure what that is. And then, so that'd be one event. An event is one instance of a record within the same track. So I would have done that and I would have stopped, and this is what I would do, and then I would move over and I would just sing the second chorus, or I would copy the first one to the second one. But that would be an event. And then what I did was I cut these events up with the knife tool so that I could do vocal alignment. And again, there is a tutorial on vocal alignment that you may want to look at because there's some cool new plugins that have come out to do that vocal alignment. And that's basically if you do a double or a harmony, you never sing it perfectly doubled. And you want to align them so that it sounds like one vocal, but really fat vocal because you doubled it. So these are called events. So what can you do with events? Okay. First thing you can do with an event is you can move an event. So if I could take this one over here and I can move it. Now why would you do that? Well, if I'm doing vocal alignment, I would be moving it. So this one's not aligned directly with the one below it. So I would adjust it. And if you need to get more granular, you use the horizontal zoom. And you come over here and you can just move it as you want or move this one as you want, etc. Now, a key thing here about moving events in the same track. Now, you can move an event to another track. I can put it down here. Okay? But I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to go down to my fader port here, and I'm going to hit undo. Puts it back. And you got to be careful of one thing when you're working with events. And that is this little button up here called toggle snap. Now, I like to call it snap to grid, but here it's called toggle snap. If I have that off and I move this track, I move this event within this track, you notice it's freeform because it's not snapping to anything, which is fine because when you do like a vocal alignment, you don't want it to snap to any of these grid lines. If I turn that on, based on what I have here in the notes, because I use bars as my grid line, you could use seconds and frames. And if you look at my tutorial for adding a new song, it explains that. But these bars are the musical note, differences in terms of whether it's a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note. And I have this set to a quarter note. When I move this, it's going to snap to quarter notes. Okay, snapping to the grid. Okay, if I make it more granular, it'll snap. Now you see the grid change, and it'll snap to that, and it's snapping to the grid. So why would you want to use snap to grid versus freeform? Well, freeform, one example would be vocal alignment. The other one would be if you want to copy this whole chorus to the second chorus because you don't feel like re-singing it and it was fine, then you would highlight the whole thing and you use snap to grid to align it perfectly into the next chorus. And that's why I always say, record with a click track with the metronome so that you are aligned already with your recording to these grids, and then you can move things around. And there's more on that on the recording side of everything. Okay, so what else can we do? We can do fades, and we can trim. So you can basically take these and you can pull them out. You could add fades to them. And I do have a tutorial that shows a lot of good uses and stuff and how to really manage your fades and your trimming and your volume. This little button here in the middle will change the volume of that event independent of the track. So if there's one event that you want to increase the volume, but you want to leave the track the way it was, you can do that easily in Studio One with this little pull down here thing. Okay. that takes care of that. Okay, and another thing you do with events, which is kind of cool, and I like this a lot, and I used it a little bit in Yellow Butterfly with some of the classical guitar notes, is you could do something called nudging. Nudging. Okay, so what do we do with nudging? So you want to nudge this. Why would you want to nudge it? You would want to nudge it because you want to move it, and let's take not latch, but the toggle snap off, and you want to move it left and right, but you only want to move it a teeny bit. Okay, so if you highlight it, and you come over here to edit at the top, this is one way to do it, but it's not the way I actually do it, and you come down to nudge, okay, you can nudge back, and you can nudge forward, or you can nudge by the bar, so it'll actually nudge one bar at a time, etc. And this nudge will happen basically in like milliseconds, so it's very minor. So if you find that you're trying to move something and you move it, you're always moving it too far, or you're always not moving it enough, and you just want to move it a little bit, and so make this a little wider, okay, you can nudge it. And the way you do it, and I'm using a Mac, so I would hold down the Option key or the Alt key, and your arrow right and your arrow left, if I hold down the Alt key and I do the arrow right and arrow left, it will nudge it. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but it's moving. I'm clicking a lot of times down here. See, it's moving. So it's nudging it, and that's all a nudge should do. It should just nudge it a little bit. Oh, there it is, and you do it all by ear, right? So if you want to do it by the bar and you come down here to nudge, okay, I would have to use the Command key and the Alt key together, Command Alt, and nudge it, and look, it's moving it by the bar. Okay, that's kind of dramatic. So I figured that if you're doing that, you might as well just move it yourself, right? So I tend never to do that. I always just use the millisecond one, which would be the Alt or Option key and the left or right arrow. So that would be your nudging, and that's pretty cool. It is useful when you can't manually move it the minute amount that you want to move it. And it happened with a note in Yellow Butterfly where there was a note hit on my classical guitar solo. I won't tell you where. And I didn't play it exactly where I wanted it to land. Well, I'm not going to redo the whole thing. I just I cut that one note out, and I just kind of nudge it to the right a little bit and back and forth until, audio-wise, hearing-wise, it sounded right to me. And that's how you edit stuff, right? Okay, cool. Let's get into a couple more things you can do. So, what can you do with a track? So I'm going to highlight this track, and I'm going to right-click it. And we have all these little things to do. So let's go through them pretty quickly here. Okay, the first one is edit the track. Now, I'm not going to use a vocal track because when you edit a vocal track and you have Melodyne on it, what will happen is it will actually open Melodyne first because it thinks you want to do that. So we're going to take this track right here, okay, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to right-click and I'm going to say edit the track. Whoa, okay, what did it do? What it did was pretty cool. Okay, it took the space, the real estate space, where the console was, and it gave me an edit view. Now, what I can do here, and all the, the knife cutting and the eraser and the range tool, they're all duplicated here. So now I have all this good stuff, quantized and everything, directly for this track at a very detailed view, very large. Now you could always just take the track up here and enlarge it, but what this does, it allows you to edit specifically this track, and you can move this track on the timeline and do your editing without moving the song timeline. Okay, so it allows you to get really granular with an editing of the track, and then you can actually horizontally zoom in like that and back out like that. So say there's a glitch, and the glitch is like somewhere in there, and you can actually, you can read up on the manual and everything, you can actually smooth that glitch out and get rid of that little click and stuff like that, and you can really get granular. You can also do that up here, but then you're working within the whole song, and say you don't want to be moving things around up here. I just want to take this one track and just want to edit it right here, and I'll do what I want, and then once I'm done, if I want to quantize it, I'm just solely looking at that track, and it gives me a great view of it. You can do it either way, but this is a great option if you want to get very granular on an editing of a track. So get out of that, you click the X. Again, if you want the console view back, you come up to view. And you could have hit the editor up here, would have done the same thing. So I'm going to put my console view back because Gabriel likes his console view. And that's where all my plugins are, etc. Okay, so then if you right click the track again, I can hide the track. Now, one thing before I hide a track is make sure you have this channel view open here. Okay, and the way you do that is there's a little button down here, and when you look at my navigation tutorial, and that'll explain more. So if I turn this off, then that channel view goes away. But you need that channel view for hiding track, not for hiding it, if you want to unhide it. So I highlighted this track. It's highlighted down here in the channel view, and I right click it, and I say hide the track. So it hid the track. So it's not gone, it's just hidden. Will it still play? Yes, it'll still play in the mix because you didn't mute it, you hit it. So why would you do that? Well, what if I wanted to have, and you can create scenes down here, and you look at my navigation tutorial, look in the manual too, for scenes, I can create scenes for the console and for the track view that would actually just say you want to just look at all the drums or just all the vocals. So what would you do? You would hide everything else and create a scene, and then you can toggle between scenes, and that's a real good reason to hide. Another reason to hide is, and I made it, not a mistake, but it was like really funky. Let me do something here. The way you unhide it is you come to the channel thing here, and there's a little dot right here, and you notice the one that's hidden is kind of like grayed a little bit. If you hit that dot, it'll bring that track back to the visual in the track view. Okay, so what I did once was, yeah, I'll admit my mistakes. Sure, why not? So I actually had a guitar play from somebody, and I thought it was good, and I thought, nah, I don't want it. But I didn't want to lose the performance. So what I did was I muted the track, and then I hid the track. So I went hide. Same thing. Now it's hidden. It's hidden. It's showing you it's hidden down here. Okay, fine, no problem. So now it's hidden, and it's not going to play. That's what I wanted. Well, that's not the best way to do things, and here's why. When I was at the end of all the mixing, I looked here and I said, oh wow, this global mute button's on, which means that something's muted in this 10,000 tracks. And I kept scrolling up and down, and I couldn't find what was muted. And it never dawned on me that it's telling you that there's an active track muted, but it's hidden. It took me a while to figure that one out. So then I realized, oh, there it is. So what I did was I unhid it by hitting that little dot. I took the mute off, and I did what I should have done, and I should have disabled the track. And what that does is it doesn't hide it. You can hide a disabled track, but it doesn't hide it, but it actually disables it. It disables the play of it. It disables the plugins because you don't want the track anymore, but you don't want to remove the track. So if you right click, there is remove track, which removes it. It is gone, and the only way you get it back is by undoing. If you come down here and you say disable track, is what I really intended to do, it'll gray out the track. Now, it didn't hide it, okay? I can still hide it. But when I disable tracks, I don't hide them because I want to remember that it's disabled. Now, down here, if you look, it has that same gray, okay? But the dot for hidden is still on. The dot for not being hidden is still on, and therefore, I still see it. So what I do is I disable track, and then I take it, and I make it really small, like that, just about right there. So now as I'm scrolling up and down, I see, oh, there's a disabled track there, and I can see it in the console and the name of it, okay, and the name here, reminding me I have a disabled track, but it's not playing, but it's not hurting my visual. So that's just what I do. You can do whatever you want. You can do that and then hide it. That's fine too. Now, what if you say, oh, I disabled the wrong track? So you come back in here and you can enable the track. Cool stuff. Okay. The other thing you can do is, and we'll get to duplicate, which is kind of cool, is you can lock the track, which puts a little lock thing here. You don't want to make a mistake and accidentally edit that track, which I have done. So I think I'm on one track, but I'm on another, and I'm changing like stuff on the track, and I go, oh, I did, and then 5,000 undos later. So if you're done with tracks, I would recommend to lock them. Just remember they're locked, and you can unlock them. One of the things I use a lot would be, and I'll put it here. Let's actually do something that's a little more apparent. Okay, here's some guitar stuff. And I highly recommend color coding your stuff, so your guitars are one thing, your bass is another, your vocals are another. It'd make it so much easier. And then also use the arranger track up here, so when you're going horizontally, you know where you're at. And of course, I have a tutorial on arranger tracks and the way you can move around choruses and stuff like that. But anyway, let's do a duplicate track. So if I have this track here and I want to duplicate it, there's two ways to duplicate it. One would be you come down here and you can duplicate track, or you can duplicate track complete. What's the difference? The difference basically is a duplicate track will duplicate everything, the plugins and everything, but the performance. So I'm going to highlight that track, and if you highlighted multiple tracks, it will duplicate all of them. So what's going to happen is it's going to duplicate it below it. If I highlighted this one, and I did duplicate, which you can do, it would put the duplication 2 tracks below these 2 tracks. So it always put it below the highlighted one. It's kind of a standard thing in Studio One. You know, if you add a track, it's below the highlighted one. If you duplicate a track, it's below the last one that you are initially duplicating. So let's just take one, right click, hit duplicate. Now, depending on the kind of processing that you have on a track, it could take that fast, or if you have a vocal track like I have that has Melodyne on it, which is a pitch correction plugin, and I have a tutorial on Melodyne, which you really want to check out. It's a really great plugin for auto-tune and stuff like that. It will take a little bit longer to duplicate the track because it's duplicating all the plugins and all the processing, but not the performance. So this track duplicated, and you can see the guitar stuff was not duplicated. So I'm going to undo that down here in my fader port. Fader port, by the way, is a hardware piece that has the actual physical fader and a lot of buttons like you would have on a regular console. And so it's easy to hit the, rather than coming down here and trying to hit, record and this and that, it's right at your fingertips, and there's the record button, play button, the stop button, undo, and all that stuff, and the actual fader. So if you look here at this fader here, it's only because I said fader port. You look at this fader here, okay, and you see it moving, and even down here in the console, it's because I'm physically, with my finger, moving the fader in the fader port. I highly recommend that if you have Studio One to get a fader port, which is a single fader, so it'll, every time you change tracks, it'll adjust itself to that track. And I also have a fader port 16, which is a bigger console, and it has 16 faders. So if I'm doing an initial mix, I don't have to like jump between the tracks. It'll just move as I do the faders on that fader port console. So that's why I said I'm going to hit the undo button on the fader port. And that would get rid of that duplicated track. Well, actually, no, because I moved the volume, it's undoing all the volume things. And now that duplicated track is gone. So now let's do this. Let's duplicate complete. Why would you want to do that? Well, I would do that because I am taking something, and I've done this, I've duplicated a whole chorus because I wanted to take that chorus and I wanted to have a whole duplicated part of that chorus with the performance, and I only put that at the end of a song, and I wanted at the crescendo at the end of the song to have a chorus that wasn't in the same tracks as the original track. So I duplicated that. It did a real quick job of duplicating all those nice stuff. I deleted the stuff I didn't want, and now I had a complete duplicated version of the other track that I can now manage separately. So now I hit duplicate complete, and here we go. Now it duplicated the track above it, so I have 3 of them, and that's a complete exact duplication of it. And now if you want, you can say, okay, I duplicated that, and this one I want to get rid of that, and this one I want to get rid of that, and this one I want to get rid of that, because I want this to be EQ'd differently than this one, but I wanted to keep the same performance, and there's a good reason to do it too. So you duplicate it, and there's certain parts that you want to EQ or have a different effect on, and then there's another one. So now you take the one track, you duplicate it complete, and then you get rid of the stuff in the first track you don't want, and vice versa on the second track. So some cool stuff that you can do with duplicate complete. For just duplicate, I would do that if I had a vocal track and I had some really great adjustments in a plugin and the effects, and now I want to, after the fact, I'm like, I think I want to double that. So then I would duplicate that track without complete, because I don't want that performance. I'm going to actually record new on it, but it actually duplicates all the plugins and everything, and that's kind of cool. Okay, so that's duplicate track. Remove I'm highlighting this track. If I do that, it will remove the track like we said before. And then what else is there? So what we have here is layers. So layers, and you can look at this in my recording tutorial, but layers are where, and I'm going to do this on this track, add a layer, and it didn't go away. A layer would be like if you're doing multiple takes for a vocalist. So they do one take, and you're like, that was great. Let's do another take. But you don't want to create another track. You just want to, because you're only going to keep one of the performances, do another take. So you create a layer, and the original one didn't go away. There's a little button here, okay? Right here, this one, the top one. And there's the layer. That's the original performance. It moved it to a layer and gave you open space again to do now another take of that vocal, say. And then you can add another layer, and then you can have like 3 layers. And then you can say, wow, I like the first phrase of this one, and the second phrase of that one, and the third phrase of that layer. And you can actually move them all up to the actual real track where it's going to play, and take pieces of each of those layers and use them as if it was one performance. Cool stuff. Look at my recording tutorial for exactly a lot more detail on how to do that. Okay, so if I do an undo, then the layer is gone. So that's a very cool thing with layers. And you can do it manually here. And the other thing you can do with layers, just real quick, is down here in the record, you can do takes to layers. So rather than, hey, vocalist, sing. Okay, hold on a second. I have to add a layer. Okay, now sing again. Hold on a second. I have to add a layer, sing again, and then the vocalist is waiting in between when they're all pumped up to, like, they're charged to go. You can put it takes to layers and click that on. So you record one time, and it's in my recording, and I actually do examples of it actually happening, recording tutorial, and they will sing, and you say, cool. And you say, you ready? Yeah. And you just hit record again. It'll automatically create that layer, and there'll be in the actual track, there'll be the next performance. And it'll just keep doing that, and down, down. And it's very cool. It's very efficient for your vocalists, too, that they don't have to be sitting around waiting all day. Okay. Show and hide automation. We'll just show and hide the automation like this button up here will do. It's the same thing. And then there's a couple other things here, like add tracks and some duplicate stuff from the top menu, and add folders, which I don't use, but you can look that up. One of the main things that I want to show here is add bus for selected channels. Okay, so if I take, say, let's go up here and do something. Let's say I want to take my vocal tracks, these tracks here, okay, and I want to create a bus. What's a bus? Okay, a bus is where you're grouping the routing of whatever tracks you select to a single fader, a single channel in your console. Why would you do that? Because maybe you want to raise all of them at once in volume or lower them at once in volume. Maybe you want to apply an overall plugin like an EQ. So you've EQ'd and you've reverbed and you did all this stuff to the individual tracks, and then you create a bus. So now I want to raise all those tracks volumes at once proportionally. I just raised the bus. Okay, and then maybe you create a bus that has no vocals in it and everything else, and now you can raise the vocals against the music kind of thing. So you have 2 buses, all right? Or you can just put anything you want into a bus. I highly recommend doing that. Therefore, you can add like, okay, everything's fine. I did all this EQ on all these vocals, but now I just want to raise the high end on all of them. Well, do you really feel like going into 5 vocals and one by one raising the thing, okay? And you're not sure because some of them might already be raised a little bit, some not raised, and then you have to raise them all proportionally. Why do that? Create a bus for all those vocals and just raise the EQ at the high end if you want to add air, and it'll add it for all of them, preserving the original EQ settings of each one, and you don't have to try to figure out, well, I raised this one by half a dB, and I got to raise this one by half a dB, even though it's different, and that. So what you would do is you would highlight the selected tracks that you want to add a bus, and obviously, I don't see any reason why you would take one track and add a bus because it would be the same thing. So it would always be at least more than one. And you right click and you hit add bus for selected tracks. Okay, I'm not going to do that because we already have it. So let's go down here. So in the console, you can slide over if you have more stuff in the console, and you can go all the way over, all the way over, all the way over. And then initially you'll have all your audio tracks, and you can see the audio icon down here. Then you have your instrument tracks. And then you would have your bus channels. And here they are. And I always make my bus channels white because then it stands out to me. And then right after the bus channels is your main mix, which never moves when you move the cursor of the console because you always want to see your main output here. So now with this, I have a bus vocals, and that's where all my vocals are going. So if I want to raise all the vocals at once because all the vocals are too low in the song, I don't want to go individually to. And if you click this all these little lines here, these blue lines, it tells you everything that's in that bus. Well, I have a lot of vocals in this song. And these are vocals that are in the chorus, and the verse, and bridge, and everything. So I took all of them, I highlighted them, I created this bus, and here they are. It tells me which ones are in it, which is cool. And then if I want to raise all the vocals, I can just raise this one fader. If I want to solo all the vocals, I can just solo this one channel. If I want to add a plugin to all the vocals like I have here with Isotope, you can do that, and it applies to all of them. And I generally have a bus for vocals, and then I generally have a bus like this that says no vocals. And that's everything else. So that's all the other instruments. So now I can just go between the two in an overall sense and do that. Then I have some other buses I have one for all the strings. So if I want the strings to come up, just the strings, all the strings, fine. Chuck guitar, full guitar, verse guitar. And you can look, like here, this one, the full guitar, there's only 2 tracks. But I still want to have a bus there. It doesn't cost you anything. Just create a bus of multiple tracks, and you can manage it there, or you can manage it individually. Generally speaking, all my buses are centered because these buses are stereo. I would always do the panning on the individual track over here and leave this at center, so I generally don't change that. And that's pretty much about buses, which is very cool stuff. So the last thing I want to go over is how do you add plugins to your tracks. Now we saw how to, if you already had a plugin on a track, and how to copy it to other tracks, like these vocal tracks here. So let's just say here, this track 57, whatever it is, I have no inserts, and it doesn't have to be totally blank. If I already have an insert, which is a plugin, I can add another one, and I can put them in whatever order I want. So let's look at both these scenarios, and I think we'll be finished with tracks. So over here is where your plugins are, and in the navigation tutorial, it explains all this real estate and functions and stuff like that. But let's just say for this track, I want to add, let's see, Ozone 9 equalizer. So I'm going to drag that, I'm going to click on it, I'm going to drag it to this track, and bingo, it is on the track. The first thing it does, it'll add it to the track, and it'll also then bring up the dialog box of that plugin, and which it just did, and that's Ozone 9's EQ. Now I have an EQ on that track. Fine. I can close that. It'll automatically open it because as soon as you've dragged it, you want to use it right away. Okay, if you want to bring it back, you just double click it, and it will bring back the dialog box of that plugin. And there it is. Okay, cool. Now I want to say add another plugin to this. I can either drag it from here and put it there. So let's just say do something easy. Say I want an exciter. So I'm going to take the exciter and I'll drag it over to the same track, and it will add it to this list of inserts, and you can expand this, and there it brings it up because it thinks you want to do something. And I'm going to close it, and I'm going to raise this up a little bit so I can see, because if you have a lot of inserts, you want to raise this up so you can see them all. Now the way this is going to work is it's going to go through the first one, do its thing, and go through the second one. What if you want to change that order? Then you take the bottom one, you left click, and you just bring it up, and there'll be a little blue line again, and you can switch them, and it switches them. And that's how you do that. So, and now we see how we can drag and drop a plugin in to a track, and now we can see how we can add another one, and then we can see now how we can change the order of them. Okay, cool. And then this is, if you raise this up and down, that will show all your plugin inserts. And down here, you can't see it because I don't use it, but I'm going to pull it up. And these are your sends. So if you're sending something out of this track to some other track or wherever, to another output, this is where you would send it and move it so you can send the routing to someplace else, independent of the main output routing. Okay? And the last thing, honestly, I want to go through, since we are on the console, is when you're looking at a track, as we're talking about routing, when you're looking at a track, it shows you here where it's routing to. So the first thing right below the send is it says Neumann mic and this and that. That's the input that it's currently set on. And then the next thing below that is where is the output of this track going to. So if it says main, it's going to directly to the main. If it says bus vocals or whatever name you use for the bus, it will say, hey, this is going to the bus vocal. So these three are going to the bus vocal. If I come all the way over here and I look at bus vocals, they're in that list, and you look at the bus vocal, that's going to the main. So the 3 tracks are going to the bus, and the bus is going to the main. Can you have a bus go to another bus? Yes, it gets complicated. Just be careful with that. So in the end, that is how your routing actually works. It's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty visual, and you can see it right down here. Okay, that's it for tracks. Hopefully this was helpful and gave you some really good basics and some really good functionality and little tips and tricks in track processing and track organization and console processing, and all the little things you can do like disable and hide, etc., etc. So hopefully this was helpful, and if it was and you liked it, please hit like. Please, if you have folks that starting out with tracks in general, concept-wise, or they have Studio One and they're just starting to use it, please share it with them. And if you do like this and you like my other tutorials and other stuff on my channel, please subscribe. That would be great because you know when new things are coming out. I'm always putting out new content for music and for literary and for my show, Radical Cathedral. So please subscribe. That would be great. It helps me out too. It's just a simple click of the button. And please like, but the most important thing to me is please share, because I promote a community of artists, and songwriters and producers, and I believe we all should be here helping each other. So please subscribe, please like, and definitely please share as you see fit. Other than that, I hope this was great for you, and please have an awesome, beautiful day. Thank you. Bye.